All righty. So we were learning about, we had just touched upon on Friday the halachos of employer-employee relations. And the question being, obviously, when a contract contains explicit stipulations, then you have to go according to the stipulations. However, if there is no stipulation, then a standard laborer, according to halacha, as far as the duration of the workday, is from v'makom she'eno yodua. He said is yitzei lefa'olo achar zrichas hachama. A worker goes to his work after sunrise. In other words, after sunrise, he's supposed to leave his home. And I guess you account for the travel time, how long it takes him to get to work. V'yavod ad seis hakochavim, and he works until nightfall. And it doesn't say as far as what you do as far as giving him travel time to get home. It's quite non-specific. Shezehu din Torah, kamo shekasuv tizrach hashemesh yitzei adam lefa'alo v'la'avodaso adei arev. As the pasuk in Tehillim says, that the sun shines and all the stars go back in the underneath the sky, and then a person will go out to his work, and his work will endure until the evening time. Now, we were looking at the Imrei Yaakov, and we had seen that if as far as how much per hour or how much per day you're obligated according to halacha to pay a laborer, if no stipulation is made, you take the average. And he says, or what we said was not the average so much, but the median, which is that if some workers are paid 3, some are paid 5, and some are paid 6, you give him the median wage that is between 3, the lowest and the highest. And what we had said we were going to look at was going to take a look at Siman Aleph Sifkat and Dalet. So let's take a look, which is the halacha if you hire a worker and you wish to go back on the original arrangement. So if we go back to this is where we were. That's right. And we were, let's see, Sifkat and Yudalid. This is what we were up to in the Imrei Yaakov here. Okay. We were talking about a community that hires a teacher. He says if 3 people hired a teacher, that was the context in which this halacha was presented, and it wasn't done by the Tovei Ha'ir, by the city council. It wasn't done by an authorized body that represents the city, but rather was just done by 3 people. There was no kinyan. So then halacha allows them to go back on the deal. They can say, I'm sorry, we found someone else. He says, but that they're still showing a lack of good faith. and they would be considered to be liable to give him a small gift. In other words, considering the disappointments that they've I think that's what it means. Ulam bazeh hakol lefi ha'adam v'ha'inyan. But it all will depend upon the person and the situation as far as giving him some kind of compensatory sort of to provide him with comfort for having dragged him into a deal without following through on it.
With some sort of severance pay.
Well, he hasn't started working yet. I'm not sure if
he hasn't started working yet.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If they found someone, let's say they found an educator that they can hire, who's they feel is just as good, but they can get for less. Or let's say a balabayit, just a regular employer, finds a worker, and he told the person that he would hire him, b'shuv matza acher yoter zol, and then he finds an employee that he can use who's cheaper. Or let's say the opposite, that the worker promised the balabayas that he would come to work for him. And a guy calls up a fellow and he says, hey, can you come work for me? And the guy says, sure, I'll be there. And then he wishes to go back on the deal. In a situation where there was just an oral agreement, either party can withdraw at any time. Because the employer who told the employee that he has work for him, but there was no handshake and no deal, the balabayas can always say to the employee, find work somewhere else. There's always work available. That's the attitude in halacha. And conversely, the employee can say to the balabayas, there's plenty of guys you can hire. In other words, there's no, despite the fact that sometimes the worker market is high and sometimes it's low, meaning sometimes there's a glut of unemployment and sometimes unemployment is very low, right? Nonetheless, in all situations, the attitude is that it's a free market. Since there was no contract signed and there was no kinyan that was made, either party can turn around and say, I'm sorry, I'm turning down our oral agreement. The only thing that the person who goes back on his word can be accused of is you've caused me a pain in the neck. Because now should gorem torach, you're causing me a burden. If it's my business and you tell me an hour before I open that you're not able to come and help, this is a problem for me because it's gonna mess up my productivity for the day. And similarly, if I call a guy up an hour before he's supposed to come and I tell him don't come, well, I've taken out a day of his work. Aval chisaron amana einbo, but it's not even called acting in good faith. Dahavi kinishtana hashar dileel sif aleph, because it's as if the price fluctuated, and when the price fluctuates, circumstances can change, and a person therefore has a right to go back on the deal. And similarly here too, when a worker or an employer goes back on his word because he no longer either needs the work or he no longer needs the laborer, or if the employer finds a less expensive worker, then it's as if the market price fluctuated. And therefore, even if I told you when it comes to a commodity, if I gave my word that I was going to buy it at a certain price or that I was going to buy it from you, and then the market fluctuates, I'm allowed to go back on my word because it was predicated on certain market conditions which no longer exist. But there is another opinion that states that just like even with market fluctuation, once you give your word, if you back out, you're acting in poor faith. The same thing would be true over here. And by the way, acting in poor faith is halachically acceptable, but it doesn't make you into a good person. Whereas if you remember, we learned this term, the chusar amana. The chusar amana is basically, Chazal say, we're not happy with what you're doing, but we can't stop you halachically. You're still within your halachic rights to go back on a verbal commitment, but you're not considered to be a very good person. You're not really a good guy because someone was relying on you. And now by going back on your word, even though there was no kinyan, even though there was no mechanism to legally bind you to that word, but a Jew is supposed to keep by his word. That was the halacha that we learned all the way back at the beginning of Hilchos Choshen Mishpat. So here too, there was no binding contract. We spoke to each other on the phone. You coming tomorrow? Yes, I'm coming tomorrow. My wife goes through this all the time with cleaning ladies, which is probably a situation that is more prevalent where you have only an oral agreement between the employer and the employee, where my wife will say to a woman, she'll text her and say, are you available on Thursday? The woman says, yes, I'll be over at 9. And then Thursday morning, she'll text. If she's good, if she's a nice person, she'll text at 7 and say, I'm sorry, I can't make it today. No reason given, just I can't make it. So that's, it's not very nice because my wife was relying on this person, right? She's got to make Shabbos and we have guests or whatever it is. Now, the im hapoel, and conversely, sometimes the employer acts up being not very nice and cancels an employment deal for a person who was relying on that. Now, the im hapoel hu ani ayin lekamen seif dalit. If the employee is halachically considered an ani, which means that they are completely reliant on that. So in Sif Dalid, we talk about this halacha a little bit further, which stated. Let me just see if I can bring it up here real quick. B'chol ze la'asher, aval ha'omer litein la'ani bein matana muetes bein matana meruba eni yachol lachzor bo min adin mipnei shenase ke'neder. He says in Sif Dalid, when you commit yourself to give a financial benefit to a poor person, you are halachically bound to make good on it because that's like making a pledge to tzedakah. And so if you know the person is poor and is reliant on that for their sustenance, so then you are obligated once you make that commitment. Okay. The chol ze omer kishlo nigram hefsid machmas bitol ha'avtacha. Aval b'im nigram al yedei ze hefsid ayin b'choshen mishpat siman shin lamed gimel sif beis, etc., etc., etc. He says if there's the halacha that you're allowed to go back on the commitment for employment is only if the guy does not incur a financial loss. But if there is a financial loss, so then there is a whole sif in Shulchan Aruch that deals with this, and that brings us to our siman here, siman Yud Aleph, where Seif Chaf Aleph, and that's going to be the subject of our discussion. We're only up to Yud now. When we get to Chaf Aleph, we'll deal with when you cause a financial loss to the employee that he cannot recoup because he cannot find work as so quickly. So we will get to that. Let me wish you all a good Chodesh. We're going to stop it here because we got to go daven.